Welcome to Reliability Matters, a podcast for the electronic assembly industry. Each episode covers topics related to reliability, best practices, and environmentally responsible assembly techniques, with insights from experts across the electronic assembly industry. Now, here's your host, Mike Conrad.
Welcome back to the Reliability Matters podcast. I'm pleased that you're here. Today, we're going to be talking about a subject we haven't really talked about in the past. It seems like we've covered everything at least one time, sometimes more. But today, we're going to be talking about contract manufacturing, the whole EMS industry. And to do that, we're going to bring on my friend and colleague, Chris Denney from Worthington Assembly. Hi, Chris.
Hey, how you doing, Mike?
Thanks for joining us today. I appreciate
Thanks for having me
here. And this is kind of a reciprocal thing. I was on your podcast, and
indeed,
there are very few podcasts in our industry. I know Altium does one,
why.
I do one, you do one, but there's not a whole lot of like true podcasts. And tell me what got you into the podcast business, the Pick Place podcast, I should say.
Yeah. So thanks for the reference there. Really, it came down to like during the height of COVID, we always like to be able to give tours and talk to customers and kind of show them around and help them to understand what it takes to get a circuit board built, because we know that tends to make better customers, and they get so many ideas of how to improve their process. And then it's like, shut everything down. Can't let anybody in the building. Barely can let ourselves in the building for a while, right? And it was like, okay, well, how do we continue this education program? So I thought about doing video. I thought about writing a bunch of, a series of blog posts and help articles. And I thought, well, why don't we just do a podcast? I love podcasts. I love listening to podcasts, especially the Reliability Matters podcast, right?
Thank you. Now we're even.
And
right?
yeah. And I thought, well, let's bring this to really the world now, because we can't bring everybody into our factory. Mostly it's just people in the New England area or the Northeast of the United States anyway. And the response has been tremendous. Hundreds of listeners. My goal was in 24 months to get to 1,000 listeners. I think we might be able to. Getting very close now. And it's just been great. And we just talk about, like, we'll break down like very, very specific subjects down to like, okay, what is stencil printing and what is that process? What is physically going on? And what does it take to get a quality print, so that we're ready to put parts on the circuit board? And we'll get into the minutia, and we'll really spend like 45 minutes, 60 minutes, like going into detail, which I remember pitching this and everybody was like, I don't know, that sounds like incredibly boring to me. And then those same people were like, actually, that was really interesting. I'm really glad I listened to it. So,
well, boring is
like
relative, right? I mean, my friends don't listen to my podcast, right? They find it incredibly boring. And
sure.
They'll listen to 10 minutes of it or 3 minutes of it and say, hey, I started listening. It was good, but they never finish it. But yeah, it's all relative, because,
right.
But I think the service you're providing, and certainly I'm providing, and others that do this, is really valuable, because there are a lot of, we've talked a lot on this show about the silver tsunami, the gray tsunami, people
Sure.
leaving the industry, right? And for a long time, there was very little turnover. We just kept working at different companies. We'd show up to the same shows wearing different badges, and we're quite an incestuous industry. We just stay in it forever. It's like a life sentence.
Right.
And then eventually we retire out. And there was a real lack of young people, of fresh blood coming into this industry. And now that's changed. Now I'm starting to see a lot of younger people entering this business, out of college.
Yeah.
And, I would imagine college will teach you how electrons work, but they don't necessarily tell you how to set up a printer, or what proper squeegee pressure should be done, and who all the paste suppliers are, right?
Yep.
So that's stuff you learn on the job. And I've noticed a lot of like larger companies that have subject matter experts. I have a good friend of mine who's a cleaning expert for a major aerospace company, and he's the go-to guy for cleaning. I have another colleague who's the conformal coating expert at a major company. But when they retire, they're not being replaced by another wise sage.
Sure.
They retire and take the wisdom with them, and so companies now are relying on vendors to be their source of education, which is dangerous because vendor A will tell you all about vendor A stuff and not necessarily a wider perspective. So I think podcasts like this, like you do, like the one that Judy Werner does at Altium and Mike Buto does at PCB Chat, and Fred Schenkelberg's work and reliability in his podcast, all really are vaults of really good best practice information that are not brand dependent. They're not biased in any way, at least not consciously. And I think there'll be a good value for people who are coming into this industry. Between all of us, we might be able to replace one sage,
Yeah, I remember early on, I was just feeling overwhelmed at work, and I was talking to the owners of the company, and I said, I just need somebody. You need to give me somebody that I can just pour my knowledge into, because I need another me to help me with all these weird projects and not let them languish, And this was another way that we could do that, where if somebody internal to the company listens to it regularly and starts to grow their knowledge base of these processes, then they're an obvious candidate for being able to, help me out with these sorts of things. So we've really enjoyed doing it. We've had a lot of great feedback, and it's full steam ahead.
That's great. So let's talk about contract manufacturing, shall we, Chris?
Sure.
I did a little research, and I think one of the best things your company has done since 1974 is change your company name.
Change
from
the name.
The original name, Moronics. Was that Moronics?
That's
to
right. Yeah.
Worthington Assembly. I think that was a good move. Not to put down the word moronics. It probably had a meaning back then.
Well, it was literally just Tom and I don't know if it was his wife who was helping him at the time or a friend, but the joke was it was just a couple morons in their bedroom building circuit boards.
Okay, so it came from the word. But I thought it was very interesting. You can tell this was 70s because their first customer was Cyborg, So Cyborg hired the Moronics to, this is like comic book material. It's amazing. But eventually Worthington Assembly became the name, and I think the company was sold, right? And
to the current owners about 14 years ago.
Yes. So, tell me about Worthington Assembly. Where are you in the big world of the EMS industry?
We're a tiny little seedling in that big world. Our factory is in South Deerfield, Massachusetts, and it's, I like to say a traditional contract manufacturer, but not every listener is going to know what I mean by a traditional small contract manufacturer. But, picture a couple of SMT lines, a couple of through-hole lines, and, shipping, receiving, inspection department, a couple of AOIs, right? Kind of your average 30 to 50 employee. I've seen them all the time. So, because previous to my career at Worthington, I was an applications engineer for an AOI company. And then for a few years after that, I was a sales rep for a rep firm. So I went in and out of all these CMs all the time. And so to me, they're very typical because I've seen dozens and dozens and dozens of them, but yeah, that's our little niche of the world. And we have, I don't think I'm going to talk too much about it today, but we have kind of a second brand called Circuit Hub, which is web-based and some really slick software there for ordering. But it's such a different environment and a different way of doing business that, I think in order to keep this conversation to less than 6 hours, we'll just talk about more of our traditional Worthington Assembly side of business.
Half our audience just drove off the road right now. So come back. He's kidding. He's kidding. So I know that the CM industry is tiered, right? So there's tier 1 contract manufacturers all the way down to tier 4, and I know there's a breakdown. Traditionally, tier 1 is 5 billion with a B or greater. Jeez. So those will be your Jabil's and probably Selectrons and whatever. Yeah. Tier 2, 500 million to 5 billion, and all the way down to tier 4, which is under 100 million, which is probably the majority of contract manufacturers, right?
Definitely.
So if someone has 100,000 boards to build, or 10 boards to build. Is there a rule of thumb? I mean, should I go to JBill, not to pick on JBill, but should I go to a tier 1 with 10 boards? Can they do it? Or is there an advantage? Does everyone have a sweet spot?
Yeah, I actually do love this subject because there are sort of like 3 tiers of orders. There's your 10-piece order, which is quite easy to accomplish. There's your 100,000-piece order, which is quite easy to accomplish. And then there's like this no man's land of like 2,000 pieces to like 10,000 pieces. That's just awful. Like no, like they're just miserable because you don't want to put all this investment in the tooling and custom automation that you would for your 100,000 piece order. And you can't just crack on it real quick on your 10-piece order. Like a 10-piece order, you're just like, just hand place a couple things here and hand solder this, done, right? But then with like 2,000 pieces, you're like, I can't. Am I going to hand place 2,000 of these connectors, right? Or am I going to wait 8 weeks for the manufacturer to get me these connectors tape and reeled with a pick cap? Or am I going to buy a custom tool to pick these? Like, it's this awful no man's land in between. And so it's really tough to sort of, it's really easy to get 10 pieces built by a small CM like us. It's miserable to get 10 pieces built by a huge CM like JBill. They not only do they not want the business, they'll do it terribly. Yeah, just ask them. They're going to be completely honest about it. I'm not throwing them under the bus. Ask anybody, they'll tell you, no, please God, do not. JBill would be like, do not send us a 10-piece order. Right. And then the 100,000 piece order, you come to us, they're like, here's 3 names, go call them. Because we're going to just make your life so miserable trying to build 100,000 pieces. It's just,
so that's actually really a pretty wise thing you just said. And not every company follows that wisdom. Some companies, some salespeople within companies just don't know the word no. Right.
Right.
We learned a
lot
of
time salespeople? Ago. We don't have salespeople.
Well, that's probably why you don't get stuck with orders like that, right? But a lot of salespeople just don't like to say no. They like to say yes to everything, particularly if they're making fear-based decisions. You can get in the whole psychology of that. But to be able to tell a customer, you're not right for us, or we're not right for you, is courageous, and you're saving the customer time and money and frustration, and you're saving yourself time and money and frustration, adding to your bottom line by saying no. So that's not enough companies have that mindset, right?
Right.
When we were a young company, we did the same thing. We said yes to everybody because we were. It was like, hey, if we got it, they didn't get it, so win-win. That's right. And it turns out that's not win-win. That is definitely not win-win.
It's the old 80-20 principle, right? It's target the sweet spot and just forget the other 20% that it would absorb 80% of your time. It's classic. Yeah. Know what you're good at, sell what you're good at, and move on. Don't accept for example, up until very recently, we would no bid any orders that required cleaning. Nope, we don't clean. We cannot build your boards. That's changing now that we have a fancy new aqueous cleaner. But yeah, we back in the day, honestly, absolutely back in the day, 10 years ago, if somebody wanted to clean boards, like, send it over. We'll figure it out. It in the sink. And we did. And then eventually we're like, oh, what are we doing? We can't keep doing this. Yeah.
Right. Well, that's good. So let's assume, Chris, that you're not affiliated with Worthington, and you have.
Let's do it. Yeah, I'm happy to be agnostic.
and you have 1,000 boards to build, or whatever number, and you're looking for a contract manufacturer.
Okay.
What are you knowing what you know?
Sure.
But Worthington doesn't exist. What are you looking for in a contract manufacturer? What's on your shopping list?
Really, like. The first thing I have to do is I have to ask myself what my organization is like. Am I working for Bose, but I'm in a small team within Bose? It gets a little trickier because there's all these sort of safety requirements and yada yada yada. Is this going to be shipped? And it gets pretty complicated. Like Bose probably is not a great customer for a shop like Worthington Assembly. even for a small team. But am I in a small company, from 2 people to 50 people? Then I probably don't want to try to work with a big J-bill. I probably want to find another company about my size and a small team over there that I can work through details, and I can ask kind of very specific questions of and get those things answered quickly, because maybe it's my first time placing 1,000 pieces. I've only ever built things on my workbench before, and I know what I'm doing. I know how to assemble a circuit board. How hard could it be? But then when you're like, okay, no, I actually have to get these into production, I have all kinds of questions. Yeah, you need somebody you can ask questions of. And that's something we talk about all the time. Our favorite customers, I'm going to flip sides here. Our favorite customers tend to be customers about our size, right? So we're, 30 something employees now, maybe over 40 at this point. But for a long time, we were just like 10 people. And we love to find the 1 or 2 person companies. And now we like to find the 12 or 20 person companies. And they tend to fit us really, really well. And they're really happy with our work. And we're really happy with them as a customer.
So how detailed would you crawl into your potential CM's business? Would you look at the brands of assembly equipment they have, or the age of the equipment, and would you look into PM schedules to, because if they have a line down situation, you have a supply problem.
Right.
So, I mean, right. How detailed would you recommend? Now, you may not recommend it to your customers because you don't necessarily want all of them crawling through your PM records, but yeah. but in an abstract scale, how detailed should a customer's due diligence be to a potential contract manufacturer?
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense to I think it would make a lot of sense to start out with, if you have something really small and simple, and you're not overly concerned with that particular build, send it to a potential CM. You can kind of go sight unseen, right? Just see how that flows, see what the business relationship is like with the person doing the quoting, and how they ship it and how it comes back to you and how it looks like you can spin your wheels for days doing all kinds of due diligence. Like, don't screw around with all that. Just give it, like if you go to a new restaurant, you're not gonna spend $40 on a dish. You're going to buy, you're going to see how the burger is or something. Not that you particularly like burgers, but you want to see what the environment's like. You want to see what the staff is like. You want to get a feel for it. And then you go back and you're like, okay, now how's the chef? I don't think
whole Gordon Ramsay thing, going into the kitchen and, screaming at the cooks, right?
Yeah. No, don't bother with all that.
Don't do that. Right.
I really don't think the brand of equipment matters at all. Maybe a little bit, but not too much. It really doesn't matter all that much. Even the type of equipment, at the end of the day, ECRA, DEC, and MPM, they're gonna do an excellent job of getting paste on the board. Universal, ASM, Fuji, Juki, they're going to do a great job of getting parts on the board. These are robust companies at this point. There's not a lot of fly-by-night companies left. If they've been in business a while, you don't have to worry too much about their equipment, in my opinion. And if I was outsourcing, I would not be overly concerned. I would be a little concerned if they had all brand new equipment, because I've actually been on the side where I've been installing equipment brand new, and I go, wow, you got 4 pick and place machines lined up here, and I'm just doing the math. I'm going, man, you guys I hope you got the business for this. Is $2 million worth of equipment. I hope you're right. I hope you have the business to push through it. And then, it's like, hey, pay us. Where's the money for that machine we installed? And lo and behold, they're gone, right? Because they couldn't fill that line. Right. So I would be a little concerned if you notice overly new equipment. I'd also be a little concerned if you notice overly old equipment. They're not investing in the company. The owner's got a 6,000 square foot house and a boat on the Cape, and he's got 30-year-old pick and place machines. Then right. Yeah, you should probably be a little concerned about that. But somewhere in the middle is probably appropriate as far as like, I would kind of consider age of the equipment to be important. Look for investment. Like, hey, when's the last time you did buy a piece of equipment, right? Like, did you make an investment last year in your company? Like, are you working on your company? Are you working to improve your company?
So you're looking for responsible investment,
yes.
right? Not just like overly invested where someone
Right.
is going to drop you for a slightly higher paying customer so they can keep their mortgage paid. And you're also avoiding people who are, like you said, spending all their time at the Cape, with their 35-year-old Amistar semi-automatic through-hole
Amistar,
inserters.
holy
Remember
cow,
that
he's
name from
digging
the past?
deep.
Contact
Oh my gosh.
systems, all that, right?
Yeah.
Right. Cut and clinch machines, back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
we still have one of those. I don't remember. Whenever we get an order for like tons of through hole, we have to pull out the old cut and clinch machine.
Right.
It's so rare anymore, but we literally,
So the one with the little laser light that shows you points to where to insert the lead?
Here's the dirty little secret about it. Every time we use it for a big order, it breaks on us every single time. And there's only one guy that we know of that can reliably fix it. So every single time we do the quote, we don't we don't break it out as a line item, but we flush in like a $500 extra because we know we're going to have
you're going to have to pay for a
machine.
service call. Well, it's funny, years ago in another life.
So please use Surface Mount for the love of all that is good and great in this world. use Surface
Exactly.
Mount.
Many, many years ago in another life, I was in the printing industry, and we had this plate maker, this old plate maker. It was built in the 60s, and this was the 80s.
Hang on. I'm a little young. What is a plate maker?
Oh, it makes plates that you put on the presses that form the impressions to print. So when you print what's called
you're talking
printing,
about like paper printing.
Paper printing,
okay.
yeah, not modern,
Right.
digital printing. This was, back.
Sure.
And there were metal plates and there were paper plates, but basically put the image on the paper and then they go on a roller. Anyway, this machine was built in the 60s, and this was the early 80s at the time. So we got this machine used, and it was still working. And I remember every once in a while it would break down, and we'd call the manufacturer, who was still in business, although they hadn't built that machine in a long time. And they'd send some young kid in, and he'd look at it and go, or he'd look around the shop and go, "Where's your plate machine?" I was like, "You're standing in front of it." And he'd go, "Wow." And then we'd just ask him to leave. We would just say, "No, sorry. We want the old guy who's, debating whether he should retire, that was there when those were built," right? Because he was the only person that could fix it. So yeah, kind of the same thing. It became a tribal legacy kind of thing. And
you've heard the old anecdote of the factory lays off the guy in his 60s that they're having to make cuts, yada yada yada, and then the machine breaks down and nobody can get it working. Have you heard this one before?
I don't think so.
And what happens next? All right, so he comes in and he says, "Yeah, I can fix it. It's going to cost you $10,000." "Oh yeah, well we're losing $1,000 an hour, or whatever. Just get it running." "Okay, no problem. I'll be right back." He goes out to his truck, comes back in with a big frickin' hammer. He just boom slams the thing up the side of the machine. Just fires right up. Everything's running. Spitting out product constantly. And they go, "What? We're not paying you $10,000 for that." He goes, "No, you're paying me $1 to hit the thing with a hammer. You're paying me $9,999 for knowing where to hit it with a hammer."
Exactly. I remember once many years ago, we did a service call. Someone called and said something wasn't working. So we told them to check A, B, or C. And, the response was, yeah, I checked that. I checked that.
Of course. Yeah.
So we sent someone out 3,000 miles, right, coast to coast. Yeah. And it was one of the things we asked them to check. It was literally like turn the breaker back on. And then the guy goes, "Well, I'm not going to pay you the whole amount because it was too easy." And
come on.
You're not paying us for this. You're paying us to sit on an airplane for 5.5 hours and stay in a hotel and rent a car and you're kind of paying a penalty for not following our instructions before, right? I mean,
we told you to check the fuse box.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good reason to know your customers well. So what are some of the common mistakes customers make in either selecting a CM or working in a relationship with the CM? I'm sure, without identifying any customers clearly.
No.
What are some of the common frustrations on your end?
It really just comes down to too many assumptions, right? It's just too many assumptions. Just because something has gone one way for so long and then you go to a new CM doesn't mean they're going to do it the same way. You know, I'll give you an example. So we had this one customer who would order all of his circuit boards, and he liked to have black solder mask, and he just loved black solder mask, and all his orders came through black solder mask. And then one day, we're explaining to him like, we're kind of struggling with this one part and going on and on. And no, we never suggested, and he never asked, well, maybe we should try green solder mask, because it was this tiny little micro BGA and we couldn't get the black mask down in between. And I say we, but I'm talking about we buy the bare board for the customer. And so we're doing the sourcing and everything. They couldn't get the black. And then as soon as somebody was like, hey, why don't we try green solder mask? It was like, oh yeah, no problem. Yeah, we could build these all day. So it's really just like making too many assumptions and not having the conversation about, hey, this is something I want to try. Can you handle it? Just sometimes sending the order over the wall and not asking like, hey, have you ever built a part like this before? No? Okay. Well, then we got to have a conversation about it. I'll give you another example, probably an even better one, not so much about bare boards, but we had a customer, one of our just easiest customers to work with. He was using the new Texas Instruments X4 SON. It's this, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. It's this crazy weird part. And we had never seen it before. He had never used it before. It was kind of a brand new part for some kind of tiny little voltage regulator. And hey, have you ever used this part before? No, we never have. And what is a typical CM fear? Like they're going to be afraid to say, no, we've never seen it before. We don't know how to handle it, because then, we're not going to get the order. But it was so much better because we said, no, we've never seen that before. Let's test it out. Right? Can we make some dummy boards? Can we work together on this project, make some dummy boards, try some stencil configurations, try some layout configurations, different thicknesses, until we just nail this. And that's what we did. And then when it came to actually building the product, it just went butter smooth, right? Because now we've figured out how to handle it. Having those kinds of conversations and just not assuming that the CM can handle it. It's like, well, that's your job. You're supposed to build circuit boards. That's your job. Yeah, but even a mechanic who's never seen a Ferrari before isn't going to know how to change the spark plugs, right? Like, yeah, it's his job to change the spark plugs, but he's never seen an F40.
Right. Where are they? Yes.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Have you ever run into a situation where? Well, let me back up a little bit. Several years ago, I was hired as an expert witness. I've talked about this experience on the show before. I was hired as an expert witness in a civil litigation matter between an OEM and a contract manufacturer. Mm-hmm. And the short of it was the contract manufacturer was given a statement of work, and they performed exactly to that statement of work. And It turned out the statement of work was defective. And
oh boy.
In addition, the statement of work required certain types of testing to go on. Bakeouts and testing under high temperature and humidity. And when the ovens started breaking, their customer, the OEM, told them, don't worry about, just cut the tests in half. Half the ovens broke, so they basically cut the test time down by half. So
wait a second, you're saying that the test chamber oven?
Yeah, they had about 10 ovens or so. 5 of them became inoperational. So their customer, so the CM's customer, said, just cut the test time in half.
Sure. With
half the ovens, so you can still maintain production flow, because right. So what was important to them was not the testing; it was the throughput, right? And that's because the OEM was funded by venture capitalists who were showing up at every meeting, looking at numbers, going ship. So the CM basically had them sign off on it. And it's like, okay. And as the product started failing, 60,000 boards had to be recalled. And this contract manufacturer got sued because the OEM said, yeah, we told you to do this, but you're the experts. You should have known better, and you should have told us no. Right?
Oh,
It was
that's a
shoot the
nightmare
messenger
scenario.
kind of thing. So, or they should have been a messenger. Now, maybe there's some validity to that from a legal standpoint. I don't know, but I was helping represent and defend the contract manufacturer, and saying like, no, I mean there were email chains that warned that we do not recommend you do this. We recommend X, Y, Z, and then we got responses back saying, no, we need to ship, and we give you permission to do it, and that still got them sued. So,
Yeah.
do you ever have to have tough conversations with your customers? Is it like
All the time.
you can't do this? It doesn't work
Yep.
this way, right? And
All the
how do you
time.
handle that?
Just perfect honesty, just perfect, complete honesty. Be perfectly open, explain the risks. I don't think I've ever been in a situation where a customer said, yeah, it's okay, and I still felt really uncomfortable about it. Like, we usually come up with some kind of a resolution. Like, I guess the one thing I can think of is we from time to time, it's way more, way less common now than it used to be. But we used to see orders or designs all the time that would have vias in the pad of like a gull wing QFP or like a 1206 capacitor. It'd be a via, like an open plated via, not even like filled or plated over, just an open via, and you'd be scratching your head going, this thing looks like garbage. Like, that's never, that solder joint's going to fail the first first time it sees a freezing temperature or something, a couple thermal cycles, and that's gone. And we used to come across these things, and we would be in the middle of it, and we go, whoa, 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 we have to stop. We have to talk to this customer. And the conversation isn't like, hey, you put vias in these boards. These things look like garbage. It's like, hey, look, we should have caught this. We didn't catch it. Now we're in the middle of production, right? We've stopped production. We're noticing this issue. Here's pictures, right? Take pictures, nice high resolution pictures, video microscope, explain the situation, explain the risks, and then offer a solution. That's really what you need to do all the time. Is you need to say this is not the right way to do it, and don't just leave it there, because that is just a way to start arguments. Really, it's a way to just make people angry and frustrated. You say, this is not the way to do it. Here is what we suggest. I recommend that we add solder paste or touch these up with a soldering iron, and it's going to cost X number of dollars per board. And that is the solution we've come up with. The alternative is we stop, we refabricate these, and we fill the vias or whatever it is. And so give them some options as to how to move forward, but don't agree to just keep assembling the boards with almost no solder, unless I occasionally it'll be like, it's 10 boards and they're like, I'm just putting on my bench. I just needed a dummy board to try out this new BGA or something.
Right. You look at the
like
context in which the boards are going to be used. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You're going to throw it out in 4 weeks. All right. That's fine. But, if you're shipping this, please don't ship this.
So this is kind of a segue to my next
conversation.
Yeah. And that is probably a partial answer to my next question, which is, in today's somewhat cutthroat economy, I think the proliferation of Amazon and has probably led to everyone's looking at price, right? Not very many people are looking at value. So let's assume you bid a job out at $100 a board, and someone else bids it at 70, and someone else bids it at 300, whatever. Beyond the price,
I should have bid $299.
$299.99. Right. Exactly.
I should have been $299. Yeah.
Exactly. What besides getting the product back, per the specification, besides you shipping a board to your customer, what other value added are in that board? In other words, you're not just paying to print paste on a board and mount a component and run it through an oven at a specified temperature. There's more to it than just the completed product, right? So what are the value addeds that customers should consider that are in the price of the assembly?
So that's actually kind of I have a couple thoughts about this. So one could argue that like let's not talk about Mexico and China versus US, because that's going to have a drastic impact on cost, right? And there's just no way around it. China is going to be less expensive. Mexico is going to be less expensive. It's just duh. We don't have to have that conversation. But let's say CM in South Deerfield, Massachusetts, and CM in North Deerfield, Massachusetts, which I don't even think that town exists, but let's just theoretical CM right nearby, similar workforce, similar labor costs, yada, yada, yada. There is a obligation from your supplier to be maximizing their efficiency. So if the CM in South Deerfield is charging you $70 and the CM in North Deerfield is charging you $100, there could be very little value add from that $100 CM if they're not focused on lean manufacturing principles, efficiency, intelligent workforce, educating their workforce, and all these sorts of things where they literally can build it for $70 a board versus the other CM has to charge you $100 per board, because they are more efficient. And it's my opinion that your CM should be focused on these things and should have a culture of driving towards efficiency, and trying to eliminate waste in everything that they do. So that's kind of not answering your question, but that's something I like to emphasize because it's something that I consider very valuable and very important in our culture at Worthington Assembly. But more importantly, let's say that they're both driving towards efficiency and one CM is $100, the other CM is $70. Where is the value add? Perhaps why would you end up spending $30 more per board? Really, I think there's a lot of gotchas in this industry. Like, not gotchas. What's the word I'm looking for? Like gremlins. that's a better way of putting it.
There you go.
Like, are they? You get just because you look at a finished board in your hand doesn't mean that it's fabricated the same. It doesn't mean that they went through the same process.
Right.
Did they have the same type of temperature control in during reflow? How do you know that their ESD standards are being followed and that they didn't damage this thing microscopically, not just microscopically, but like electron microscopically damage that? Because that's what we're talking about with ESD damage. What about did they have to do any hand soldering? Were those technicians, do they understand what a solder joint really is and how to prevent cold solder joints and how to handle ground and to pre-bake the board, or not pre-bake, but preheat the board before they start soldering the ground? Just so you may not notice these little things like a hole fillet that comes all the way up to the top of your through hole pin underneath the connector because the shroud of your connector is covering it all. A cheaper CM that builds it for $70, they may just sling that thing over their wave solder or selective soldering machine or hand solder it with, the person that they just trained for the past 3 months. Meanwhile, you've got barely a solder joint that you can only see on the bottom side of the board, not a complete solder joint that won't fail over the life of the product.
Right.
So there's these little gremlins in manufacturing that a quality CM that's been around for a long time, has been doing this for a long time, has a staff that's been well trained and has been doing the same thing for a long time, knows, so that your product won't fail and you won't have all kinds of recalls in the future, versus the other guys who are cutting all these corners to get it to ship. And yeah, it looks good. You put it on your bench. You're like, hey, these look the same. I'm only going to spend $70 on it, when you don't really know the gremlins that you might see from ESD damage or cold solder joints, a couple years from now.
Right. Now that makes a lot of sense. Part of the value added is I would assume as a contract manufacturer's quality certs. What types of quality certifications or affiliations would you expect a contract manufacturer to have?
Yeah, I would say you're like, okay, so when Worthington when I first started working at Worthington, there was no IPC training, there was no J standard, there was no ISO, there was no we had to build to all that, right? And thank goodness we had people that trusted us that allowed us to maintain our business while we could build to that. But now, like if I was outsourcing boards, I would absolutely want to at least see, do you have IPC trained people? And it's not so much that like my this is all right. I wish I could somehow disconnect my name from Worthington Assembly for a moment while I say this, but like I don't really believe so much that a person with an IPC certificate is necessarily a better solderer than a person without an IPC certificate. But if you go to a CM that is willing to make that investment, it's just a signal, right?
Well,
it's
they become a known
sign
quantity versus a potential good, potential bad, right?
Right.
I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of people without certifications that are really good solderers, maybe even better than those with, but at least the ones with we know are good, right?
Yeah, because we've had situations where, like, again, early on, we had people who were doing hand soldering for us because we had a bunch of these boards that literally could only be hand soldered. Oh, nightmare. Those are gone. We redesigned all of them to SMT. Anyway, and they were fantastic. I mean, beautiful solder joints, excellent quality. They were so talented at what they do. Didn't even know how to spell IPC, let alone have a certificate, right? And then we would hire people from other CMs. We had a few CMs go out of business nearby, and we would hire them. And they would come in, oh yeah, I'm IPC certified. And you'd sit them down on a bench and you'd look at them and you're like, what? No, that is not how you solder. Like, you can't do that. But they have a certificate. And that's what I mean by, like, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a better soldering person than somebody else. But if you find a CM that is making that investment, so for example, we actually have an in-house trainer. That's a program that a CM can do. They can send a person to a class and they become a trainer for their company. And that's in my opinion, that is a real signal of a CM that cares about quality, because they're willing to not just send their people to IPC training, but they're actually willing to go the extra level and get a certified trainer in-house, right? And now you're really sending a signal out there that you care. Another thing is, being an IPC member is a big deal. I keep saying IPC like all your listeners know what it is. I hope they do. I think at this point they probably
our trade do. Yeah, I think the majority of our listeners know. But for those that don't, there's two major trade organizations in our industry. One is IPC, and they're the standards organization. We create standards at IPC. And then there's SMTA, which is a chapter-based Surface Mount Technology Association is what that stands for. Mm-hmm. IPC technically doesn't stand for anything anymore. Old Institute of Printed Circuits, I think many years ago. But yeah, it's just IPC now. But just for those 2 or 3 listeners that may have stumbled across this thinking it was something else, that's what our associations are.
You're welcome, Mom.
Yeah, right, exactly. No, we're too far in for any of my friends to keep listening. They only listen to the first 30 seconds.
Yeah, my mom will listen to the whole thing.
There you go. Good. Hi, Mom.
But the other thing I want to point out is that we recently joined IPC as a member company. And, recently, it's been a few years now. I'm not sure how long we've had it. But one of the things that you start to get exposure to is like sort of a validation of your process. So for example, we've been making quality circuit boards for decades, right? But it's only mostly from kind of like tribal knowledge. Like we do X and we get Y, and it works, and customers are happy, and product shipping, and we're solving problems for people, right? But we had the situation recently where a customer came to us and they said, I don't like the way that my solder joints look on my QFNs. These sort of leadless devices. Well, in the wash business, you know all about QFNs. But anyway, there's not enough solder there for me.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone likes QFNs. I have this theory, and I may have shared this on your show. I don't remember that QFNs were invented. Well, QFNs are proof that what happens when you don't tell your children you love them enough.
Yeah,
they either grow up to be sociopaths and serial killers, or they grow up to invent bottom terminated components, right?
Yeah,
so that's QFNs.
So he came to us. He said, I'm used to my other CM here's what that looked like from my other CM. And we looked at it and we're like, yeah, son of a gun, that looks a lot better than ours. And I was kind of scratching my head because I was like, what are you to tell me, pal? I've shipped hundreds of thousands of QFNs. Like, we know how to solder QFNs, man. And we got them shipping in thousands of whatever. Right. So that was my gut reaction, too much pride. And then he goes, yeah, no, I really don't like them. Like, I can't, if, I like working with you guys, but you got to figure this out for me. So one of the things that having IPC did for us is you get access to their documentation. You have to pay for it, but you can get, and there's a really thorough document on bottom terminated components, like unbelievably thorough. And so we bought it and read it over, and I'm looking at it, I'm going, man, son of a gun. We are not doing this right. Like, we're probably doing the bare minimum. Like, we're meeting the spec, but just like, we were probably just like barely meeting the spec. And for most people, like, yeah, it works. It's, it's fine. And then this customer revealed to me, like, no, I kind of expect it to be at the top of the spec. And having this document helped us get there. So that's another thing. Like, I guess getting back to your original question, if I'm shopping for a CM, seeing them as a member of the IPC organization tells me that there's at least a handful of people inside that organization that care about educating themselves and learning best practices and trying to constantly improve. It's the same answer to my last question. Are they constantly trying to improve themselves and get better? Right.
Yeah. They're plugged into with a group of professionals that are standards-based, quality-based, things like that. So and you have a lot more resources, particularly in a small company environment. You can't have subject matter experts in everything, right? So you can rely on the standards and
we don't have time to run all the tests and experiments and
exactly. Yeah, but all that's already been done. So you can benefit from that. How are the component shortages landing in your industry? I hear we manufacture stuff, as you know, and we see a lot more component shortages. Not just component shortages, other hardware shortages too. That we're spending way more time sourcing parts, and we've increased our inventory probably by more than 100%.
Right.
We went from just in time to just in case, right?
So you're part of the problem.
It's kind of like the toilet paper shortage at the beginning of the pandemic, right? It is cause and effect.
Everybody hears shortage, and then all of a sudden there is a shortage.
Right, exactly. So we're contributing to the shortage, I'm sure. Although, we're a small company as you are. So
but there's enough small potatoes out there. Eventually it happens. Yeah.
We are in mass and cumulatively helping to exacerbate the problem. But how do you guys handle that? And has it become an issue with your customers and yourself? And how do you work around that?
So quick plug again for our podcast. We actually interviewed 2 supply chain managers, like the whole East Coast of the United States supply chain managers for DigiKey on our show a couple of weeks ago, talking about this whole subject and why it's happening, what are the causes, and how is it getting worse, and when are we going to get out of it? And spoiler alert, it's going to be a while. But I feel like, have you ever heard the story of when was it Japan had some kind of a rice crisis? There was maybe it wasn't Japan, maybe it was another Southeast Asian country was having a crisis with rice, and so then there was a run on rice, and then all these people were starving, right? Because they didn't get in line early enough, and they didn't get the food that they needed, and and then it was literally just maybe this is why I'm thinking of Japan. I think it was Japan that said, "Hey, look, we've got an emergency." The national government of Japan had an emergency store of rice, and they said, we're going to release this because we hear about all these starving people. They never touched a grain of it. Just telling people that it was available, everybody stopped buying so much. Everybody assumed the shortage was gone, and guess what? The shortage was gone.
Right. It was self-induced. It was a self-induced fear-based shortage. Right. Just like toilet paper.
So what's happened is there has been legitimate shortages, and then everybody hears shortages, and now it's gotten worse. The semiconductor.
Beyond the original state of the problem. Right.
It's hitting us. It's hitting us hard because we are, for most of our business, we are quite literally just in time. Like we will not have parts on a shelf until you place an order. And once you place an order, then we go buy those parts. So if you wanted to place an order with us, the first thing we're going to do is check inventory availability, and we'll come back to you and say, out of these 80 part numbers, 6 of these are unavailable. What can we do about it? Here's some crosses that we found, kind of a thing. And that's kind of stuff you do. You just try to work through it. You just try to find alternatives. We actually helped some customers redesign their boards. So we said, hey, there's none of these voltage regulators available. But we noticed that the same voltage regulator is available in a different package, an SOT 23.6 or something like that, rather than your whatever it was before. And, we help them with the layout and figure out how to get that to work for their product. And then, they implement it into their design. Now they can use either voltage regulator. They can use the SO8 or the SOT 23.6. And so a little bit of engineering help, a little bit of just the purchasing folks trying to find some, we're doing one recently where there's some suspect parts. And so the customer is like, hey, I'm going to buy them. I'm going to bring them in. They're coming from overseas. And I want you to build just a handful of boards with randomly selected parts from this lot, and let's see if they work, kind of a thing, So it's really getting bottom of the barrel now, where we're starting to build boards just to test the parts and see if they're good enough. So
that actually
there's all kinds of stuff like that.
In this answer, it's a twofer, because you're actually also adding to your previous answer about what value added.
Oh, there you go.
In addition to getting the board at X dollars a board, what other stuff is in there that, beyond the components and the solder paste, right? And this is part of it. In your company's specific case, Worthington Assembly, what is your sweet customer? What's your sweet spot for a customer in terms of production and type of assembly? What's the nirvana customer for you, besides being able to pay on time, and being pleasant to work with? But what, from a logistical standpoint, what's perfect for you guys?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's something we actually do talk about quite a bit. So we would much rather have 100 customers that are giving us $10,000 a year, rather than have $1 million customer. Just from a risk management perspective, we really strongly kind of prefer smaller teams to work with, smaller customers to work with, more complex products, because that's where, we were just discussing, we can bring some value to the more complex products. We were building these boards for a customer for a while that they were a lot of fun to build. They were really easy. It was all 0805s and all these big parts and everything. And then we're building a ton of them, and then they're in Mexico now, right? So it's you can't keep those guys very long, because once they discover how easy it is to build their product, they're not going to want to continue to build it in expensive New England, right? So we like to see a bit of complexity. We're happy when the customers are a bit concerned about their IP, because, your IP doesn't leave our building, and it's controlled, and we have secure servers and everything. And
I think that's one of the major advantages of choosing U.S. based, or at least North American based, but specifically U.S. based manufacturers to build your boards, is you don't have to send that IP overseas. And because, let's face it, certain countries are just well known. Their reputation is pretty well known for not being as secure as we are here. And
sure.
I would assume if you're doing ITAR type work, work that falls under ITAR, then obviously you have to keep stuff here. Are you guys ITAR registered?
No, we don't actually. It's
an
interesting thing. Yeah, well, we don't do any defense or ITAR work or anything. We haven't had those kinds of requirements yet. And it's another piece of our culture is okay. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. We really kind of can't stand red tape and inefficiency, and ITAR and all the
you're right up there,
sure. and all that. Sure. It's that's just a headache we don't want to deal with.
Right.
So we just kind of keep targeting customers that we don't have to worry about those sorts of things. And so far it's worked. Could we be bigger by now and make more money by now if we did? Of course, absolutely. But I kind of think it's have you ever heard the old red water versus blue water analogy?
No.
Where, so I don't know. I'm going to totally botch the origination of it, but like in my mind, I'm picturing like ancient, like Spanish, English, naval warfare. And well, I say ancient, but let's say, maybe a few hundred years ago. And you don't want to be the boat in the red water, because that means everybody's just battling each other like crazy and there's all kinds of blood in the water. You want to be in the blue water. You want to be out where it's safe and easy and you got easy pickings. And like there's, not for nothing, but in the United States, a huge majority of the business of circuit board assembly is related to defense. It's an enormous market based on the national budget. And there's a lot of competition out there for that. And I don't know, there's less so for the kind of more industrial control, kind of quasi consumer level product, niche products. And we've kind of stayed focused on those sorts of things. But even within those sorts of things, people still don't want to be ripped off. Right.
That's
so
right.
They're not going to send that overseas if they're particularly concerned with their IP. So It doesn't even have to be a regulatory thing. It can honestly just be a
general concern. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah. I just don't know what's going to happen once it leaves these borders, because within these borders, there's laws and there's litigation and there's ways of controlling these things. When it leaves these borders,
there's recourse for things here where there's less recourse in other places, or a different method of recourse. So what does the future hold for Worthington? Where do you see yourselves in the next 5 to 10 years?
I love my job. I love educating people on what we do. It's one of my favorite things. It's the reason we do the podcast. It's the reason that I'm happy to be on the show here today. And so me personally, I would love to continue to be working at Worthington Assembly, continue to educate the customer base and working with customers to solve problems and figure out their solutions and these sorts of things. The company itself, I hope, just continues to nice, clean, steady growth. I would love to continue to create jobs here in Western Massachusetts. It's an amazing place of the world to live. It's just like, it's got everything, absolutely everything you could want. You have to drive a little bit of ways to get to the beach, hour and a half or so, but it's not that bad.
Be careful how much you sell Western Massachusetts, because I live in California, and my listeners that are in California are all going to want to move there, and you don't want that. So we're moving everywhere, right? So don't let us add Western Mass to your list.
We'd love to see just kind of steady, continuous growth. We've always said if we could just continue to do 10% a year. Right now, we're way beyond that, way beyond that, and it's a little painful for everybody internally. It gets frustrating when you grow this kind of a business that quickly.
Yeah.
We're on target for probably over 50% this year, which is a really difficult thing to do, to grow that aggressively. But it's happening, and we're managing it, and we're doing the best we can. I'd like to see it slow down just a little bit. The growth
catch your breath a little bit, right?
Catch your breath a little bit. Let people kind of breathe and have more time for working on the company, right? Because right now I'm doing so much of my day-to-day work. I'm working in the company,
right?
Physically on the floor, building something or ordering a stencil or programming a machine. And I want to get back to working on the company and researching new technologies and helping customers and finding those sweet cherry customers like you talked about. Sure. So, a little bit of slowdown on the growth would actually be somewhat nice.
I have another podcast that I do called Concept to Creation, where we talk to entrepreneurs within the EMS space. And that's a regular theme of entrepreneurs. They go from a journey of working in their company, 70 hours a week, whatever it takes, chief cook and bottle washer, to eventually being able to work on their company. And when I ask most of the entrepreneurs, when I ask them, what is your definition of success? It's never money. It's always the independence to be able to step back and work on, and rather than in, and be up in the crow's nest and not in the day-to-day and in the minutia of the company. That is the answer for most people's version of success, right? So I
will say,
agree with that.
I will say the owners of Worthington have found a nice balance of that. They've hired well above sort of like what they need to. So for example, there's a few people in our company that you look at our backgrounds and you go, what why are you working for this, tiny little organization? You've come from, you've come from this other thing. Well, why would you ever step into the CM world that's cutthroat and tiny margins and you're this tiny business? But they have a way of attracting talent, and they have a way of keeping those people happy, and giving them sort of what they need to grow, and the independence to make decisions, and the autonomy that they need to feel like, even though they're not working for maybe some prestigious company, they're happier because they're given all these perks. And it's not necessarily the money. It's given the freedom to sit down and have a conversation with Mike Conrad in the middle of the day from a home office. Right. And they've done an excellent job of that. And they've also set an excellent example of being able to step back and trusting their people to make decisions for them, and rewarding them when those decisions go well, and helping them when those decisions go poorly. And that's a really tricky thing to solve. But I hope someday that those guys write a book, because I think they've solved it.
Well, they made the first good move by changing the name from Moronics to Worthington. So they started early. They started making good decisions early. So
yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, Chris,
I wish they could take credit for that, but I don't think they would.
No. Okay. Well, I'll give them the credit anyway, but sure, whether it's deserved or not. Thank you, Chris, for being my guest today, and thanks for sharing your wisdom and your insight into the world of CM, contract manufacturing. It's like you said, it can be cutthroat. It can be all about the money, but I think you guys do it a little bit differently, and the impression I get is it's about more than that. It's about choosing the right customers, the customers choosing the right vendor, and having that fruitful relationship, that makes your company successful, and it probably makes your what you ship to your customers successful as well. Yep.
I would say to that point, if you are nervous to talk to your customer, you probably don't have the right customer. You should be in the position where you're comfortable to have that difficult conversation. Hey, I screwed up. And if you're afraid to tell that customer that you screwed up, maybe they're not the right fit. Maybe you're not the right fit. And the more honest conversations you can have with your customers, and honestly, same could be said, philosophically with your with your employees, with your loved ones, with your friends. Yep. If you can have honest conversations with people, then you found the right people in your life. Right. Well, tough love goes beyond just your children, right? Sometimes, we do love our customers, but sometimes we have to have conversations with them that are difficult, and we're on the receiving end of that quite regularly. That we. I hope I'm not one of those. We'll see. I'm sure you won't be. I'm sure you won't be. If not, we'll complain about each other, but we'll respect each other, and there's a bigger picture there. So we'll be fine. You'll be fine. All right. Well, thanks, Chris. I appreciate you carving out an hour or so of your day, and time to get back to work and start building boards and getting new customers and all of that. Start working in the company again. Start working. Yeah. Go back in. Right now you're on, but you're going to have to go back in for a while. We'll go back in. All right. I appreciate your time, Chris. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Mike. Thanks for listening or watching the Reliability Matters podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast app, such as Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and so many more. Also, be sure to check out my other podcasts, including the Concept to Creation podcast, where I feature conversations with entrepreneurs within the electronic assembly space, and, as we discussed earlier at the beginning of the show, the Innovations in Technology podcast, where we discuss innovative products within our industry. All three shows are also available in video format. Check out the Reliability Matters or Concept to Creation or Innovations in Technology podcasts on YouTube. Just search the show's name and you can find all three shows. Or go to mikeconrad.com. That's Conrad with a K. All three shows also appear there. Again, thanks for being part of my podcast family. I appreciate you being here. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and stay happy. And of course, keep doing it right. See you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Reliability Matters podcast. Join us on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month for new episodes of Reliability Matters.